every now and then, but it should come to our concern in every business. It's the global competitiveness, and we're going to find out more about this issue with its studies and its regulations and how to be able to apply it to the best interest of the welfare of a country. Very delighted to have with us Mr. Ashraf Naguib, Chief Executive Officer, Global Trade Matters. Good morning, Mr. Naguib.
Good morning to you both.
A very good morning to you, sir. As Dina said, maybe this is not for the ordinary citizen a very familiar expression or phrase. So can we define first what's global competitiveness, and if it is only to be implemented on the economic or trade issues, or it can be implemented in every aspect of life?
True, I like the way that you started this, because competitiveness per se is a natural instinct in human beings.
Yep.
That's what drives people to become better, to aspire to do things better than before, and this is within our own instinct. Now, if let's talk on the economic side first, and the importance of what is called global competitiveness for Egypt and for the region itself. Very simply, we are no longer in isolated islands in terms of being nations and countries. On the contrary, at this point, there is no way that we can succeed in the future without being part of a global economy. Now, let's try and simplify this as much as possible. You have Egypt, and you have an investor, and that investor has a choice now within a context of an open and free global economy. Now, the choice of investment, where does this investor want to put his money? Now, he has to look at different indicators, and one of the main things, or one of the things that investors, international investors, look at when assessing the risk or opportunities within a specific country is their ranking on what is called the Global Competitiveness Index, which is an index managed, run, developed, and implemented by the World Economic Forum. So hence, you have 140 countries that are on this specific index, and each of them receives a ranking depending on how competitive they are, based on what is called the 12 pillars of competitiveness, a certain gauge of parts and bits of the economy, such as your microeconomic environment, or, for example, your market efficiency, or the market size. These are some of the main pillars. Education and innovation are also very important. So the unfortunate thing is Egypt, on that specific ranking, currently ranks 116 out of 140 countries. Switzerland being number 1, Singapore being number 2. So you're talking about very, very small countries in terms of Singapore and Switzerland, in comparison to a country as large and as great as Egypt is. Now, we as the private sector in Egypt strongly believe that this ranking is not fit for a country such as Egypt, and believe that by making specific understanding of these pillars of competitiveness and having a nation inspired to compete globally, that we can bring this ranking down from 116 to 99 within the next probably 18 months. It's very important that we understand what are the things that we need to do and undertake in terms of changing some of these rankings on some of the indicators. Now, let's look at where we rank best and where we rank worse. And unfortunately, we rank something like 139 on the education index. So this is something that we really need to start working on. Where we rank best is in market size by default. 90 million people, growing by 2.4 million people on an annual basis. And these are not bad things, because market size, like India or like China, if utilized your human capital in the right manner, Egypt can become even more competitive. The problem is that we need to put a strategic plan towards enhancing our education and really understanding innovation. We hear about innovation in Egypt on an individual basis. Maybe a student from a university that has invented something and struggles to get the idea across. We see a lot of our young youth winning more international and scientific and technology competitions around the world, but it has to start from home. It has to start with oneself, and that's why your introduction of does it impact our lives? Yes, we need to wake up every morning as Egyptians and say that today is going to be a competitive day, because at the same time that you look in the mirror and get dressed and go to work, some other person in Singapore or in Malaysia or in China or in Japan or in Brazil or in Chile is also getting up, getting dressed and going to compete.
You're talking about the BRICS?
It's not necessarily. Anywhere around the world, people are getting up in the morning and are going to produce and become productive. And the more productive you are, the more competitive you are. So we cannot sit back anymore and not take responsibility and accountability for ourselves and our nation without being competitive and looking at ourselves from a context of a global economy.
Right. You've mentioned something that raised a very important issue, which is the innovation and competitiveness, high level of competitiveness on an individual scale. We always see that happen in Egypt, and whenever those calibers travel abroad, they achieve a lot and they can highly compete with others, or they can even go to the highest level. Where do you see the reason here that this is happening in Egypt, and why don't they achieve the same in Egypt? Especially that, to my surprise, we have an Egyptian National Competitiveness Council, and what is the role of that council to be able to enhance or, let's say, develop or reform those negativeness in our society?
The Egyptian National Competitiveness Council has been around for quite some time, a very active non-profit, non-government organization. It has some of our great economic and business leaders as part of its membership, and they produce the Egypt Competitiveness Report, which is a very strong report. Again, some of that is taken into consideration when the WEF does its own ranking on its competitiveness index. But alone the ENCC can't really do it. There has to be a drive from the private sector, which is what we are representing now, a drive so we can have more private sector competitiveness, and that is what increases or helps develop our competitiveness globally. Any free market economy is built on the private sector and small medium enterprises, and that's where we need to focus, not just on the government but also on what we can do as the business community, small and big, in terms of making our companies more competitive, giving training to more training and more attention to our human capital, and that's what really enhances. But competitiveness is an environment, and when I mean an environment, it starts at home, it starts as a child, and it starts at school. You know, that's why they have sport programs in schools, because that really teaches fair competition between children, the drive to win, the drive to become number one. And I think in Egypt we had lost this specific drive of competitiveness and wanting to be number one. We've become lazy. We have been in a society that a lot of our economic needs were subsidized and still are subsidized by the government. So hence there is no drive for me to do better. We have the concept of a minimum wage, which is what every society should have. But we should not put a cap on what is called the maximum wage, because again, that is what hinders a person's drive to become better by achieving something. You have to reward people with something, and if you and I work and you don't work and we both receive the same salary at the end of the month, there's no inspiration for me to do any better. On the contrary, I might even reduce my productivity because it's just, there's no drive again. So it starts, exactly, there should be, in our opinion, there should not be a ceiling on what is called the maximum wage. You have to give people that inspiration to do better. So it starts at home as well. It starts with the parents. For example, you know, in a lot of societies where children can go have a summer job and work and you know, get into this whole
you're talking
concept.
about changing the culture of the society itself in a way. But first, forgive my ignorance,
Please.
as I'm going to ask some questions about things which I'm not an expert in. Whenever I knew that we are going to talk about global competitiveness, you know, what came to my mind first? What's standardization, and what are those certificates from the ISO and stuff like that to be given to the companies or to meet the international standards, and hence we can say that this company or this firm, this entity, whatever it is, can compete, can be included or can invade new markets. Where is Egypt in that? And if we are aware of this, I mean, how many companies, for example, are on the right track to have a sustainability report, are on the right track to practice the real meaning of CSR? You have the mic.
You have a very limited market in Egypt. Again, it's a big country, and you still have a very limited private sector success stories in a sense. Let's look at who our global conglomerates are. And I'm not going to mention the names, but there's about 4 or 5 big Egyptian companies that work outside of Egypt and have entered new markets. Yes, they might be all 5 or 6 very successful, but that is a very limited number for what we call a country that has 90 million people. In the meantime, we still have a lot of our factories, not just from 3-4 years ago.
And then what to do to change this?
Again, it's an environment. It is an overall environment, same way that we talk about investment environment. Investment environment, again, could include traffic, quality of life, pollution. I mean, these are things. With the ISOs, as you were mentioning, yes, it does give a competitive advantage to a specific company or organization that does have the ISO in a specific thing. It could be for its manufacturing, it could be, but it doesn't necessarily give it its global competitiveness sort of recognition. On the contrary, global competitiveness has to be done collectively. It cannot be done individually, and that's why we don't so much approach individual companies, but what we're trying to create is a full initiative driven by the private sector, supported by the government, for one goal, one vision, one target, and that is to bring down that ranking. Now, we have to agree on which of the 12 pillars we can work on. If it is education, that will take us more time, but we can start thinking about vocational training now, because this is something that we can take unskilled workers and give them maybe 3 to 6 months of specific training, and from there you are now graduating people with a little bit more of a skill set. So we don't have to start, well, we need to start now on education. That's not what we need to be waiting for, another generation. But it's very important that we put a vision, put a strategy for our education system, because again, out of the 12 pillars of competitiveness, education and innovation being the most important, the rest cannot be achieved, because they are all factors of human intervention, whether it's the market size, whether it's the efficiency, whether it's productivity. All of these things are extremely important and are only derived from a society. For example, like Singapore and Switzerland. Now, Singapore does have what is called a free education system. So nobody pays really except more than $20 a year for their education. But they don't have a ceiling or a cap on the maximum wage for the teachers. So they pay their teachers international prices in a subsidized education system. And hence that produces what we see today coming out of Singapore being number 2 on the competitiveness index. So we have to think out of the box. Yes, we cannot think conventionally, and we have to do all of the things that can really inspire competitiveness in Egypt. Now, we were number 62 in 2005, so don't be surprised that, where we are in 2015-16 is a repercussion of a very, very bad 5 or 4 years that have passed.
Turmoil.
Now, not just turmoil, even your international standing. Let's say today we're at the African Union again. Maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, we were not we were suspended from the African Union. We didn't have a constitution. We didn't have a president. We didn't have a parliament. We didn't have the Suez Canal completed. We didn't have the roads that have and infrastructure projects. We had electricity cuts on a regular basis. So in all honesty, in probably the past 18 months, what we have seen is great developments, great strides towards what Egypt is aspiring to become in terms of economic development and political stability. So it is not difficult to imagine that we can go down to 99 on the global competitiveness index. But what we need to do is not just do it haphazardly, and when it happens, not know why it happened. We have to be very, very prudent in managing the process of bringing this ranking down. Because the more we manage it, the more we understand it, the more we have this opportunity to talk to you and to talk to people watching us about competitiveness, that will raise awareness. But it has to be done collectively with one vision, one strategy, one hand.
In other words, you're trying to say that, those 2 countries that you just mentioned, the ranking of global competitiveness, and not Japan, for example, and not Germany, and not the United States or the UK, they have regulations, they have studies, they have feasibilities, and they're doing some work, and they know that what they're doing. You've talked about that, and you've talked also about subsidizing education. So this means that there are rules for this to be studied.
Yes.
So, in other words, we could take countries like that, our role models. Do you see us doing that or walking in that direction?
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. We held a very, very large summit on competitiveness here in Egypt 2 weeks ago. And we also had, during that summit, the president of what is called the Global Federation for Competitiveness Councils, Ms. Deborah Wynne-Smith. And she was here again to jumpstart this process of competitiveness. One of these panels that we had the ambassador of Singapore, we had the ambassador of Slovenia, and we had the ambassador of Denmark join us in open discussion panel to talk about what are the experiences that they can share with us and what is the knowledge that we can take from them in achieving their competitiveness. And we picked these countries differently, one from the European Union, one of the Southeast Asian tigers, and obviously Slovenia, so we can compare a country that has come from a very, very tough background and tough history in terms of getting out of the Eastern Bloc and communism and really building its economy into a free market economy that ranks very well on the competitiveness index. So to answer your question, we cannot move forward if we do not share ideas. There's no need for us to reinvent the wheel, but we also have to be very careful that we are not just adapting ideas of either Eastern or Western thinking without putting our own localized concept to it. Egypt is once again very unique in demographics than Singapore. I mean, if we had to educate maybe only 2 million people, I think we would be very, very efficient. But today you've got over 10 million students in our secondary primary education system, and then another 2 within your university systems. Okay, so we are actually trying to educate Singapore 10 times. So we have to look at that very, very differently and be honest to ourselves. But then compare again that there are countries like China and India that are also doing well on the competitiveness index. But we have large land, we need to move out from the valley and the delta, think out of the box, let people innovate, be free in their thoughts and their minds. Education is extremely important, and we know that we are in a difficult situation, so we have to do the priorities first and work on them, and that is really start enhancing small, medium enterprises, enhancing innovation universities, and at the same time really focus on the concept of building a national economic strategy on the basis that we are not alone, but we are competing in the global market.
This is such a topic, sir, so it cannot be finished just like that in one episode. So we are going to leave you with a promise to see you again in another episode of our breakfast show.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you.
Mr. Ashraf Naguib, our expert of for me, the new term of the global competitiveness. Thank you very much for being with us, sir. Thank you very much for your input, and have a very good day.
Thank you.
By this, we come to the end of this very special episode of our breakfast show. My name is Namin Abdurrahman, and as usual, I had all the pleasure to have with me my dear colleague, Dina Hussein. Dina, thank you.
Thank you, Namin.
Tomorrow is another day with another crew, and it's goodbye for now.